All right, so for this game, we have a couple of things going on. So there's a sequential setup. We have 4 consecutive weeks to work with and a bunch of paintings that we have to assign to those weeks. Now, the way it's going to work is that we have 2 paintings that will be shown every single week, and there's 2 different types. So every single week, we're going to have 1 oil and 1 watercolor. And I guess it's nice in the sense that we know which ones are which. So they've already predefined the types for us. So in terms of the setup, we have just our 4 positions to work with, and we have kind of 2 tiers, right? We can keep track of 1 for oils and 1 for watercolors. Now the elements themselves, the oils happen to be G, H, as well as I, and then the watercolors happen to be P, R, and S. And I guess from there, so before we, jump in, one thing that we can kind of say here is that, we only have 3 of each type, and we're going to have 4 of each type, which means that effectively we're going to have 1 duplicate, right? 1 double of each type. So we're going to have 1 extra oil and naturally 1 extra watercolor as well. So from there, the rules. So the first rule says that no painting can be shown in 2 consecutive weeks. So essentially, I guess we can simply say that whatever your double is going to be, it can't kind of be next to itself, right? We can't have 2 consecutively. Next, gold cannot be shown in any week in which you have P. So you cannot have, basically, I guess we can say simply that G cannot be with P. Now, one thing that should be kind of noticeable is that in a lot of games, you'll notice that there's really not a lot of variables to play with. So we only have 3 of each. And once he starts cutting down certain possibilities, it starts really quickly cutting down possibilities in the sense that once we say that G can't be with P, the question remains as to who it could go with. And there's really only 2 people, R and S, that remain that G could possibly go with. And that's kind of powerful. Same thing with P, actually, because P now can only go with H and I. There's only so many people remain. So that in itself is kind of restrictive. Next, we're told that H must be shown in any week in which you have sales. So I guess that means that if you have sales, then you'll have to have H with it. Now notice the wording is very particular. It's not that you'll have to have sales anytime you have H, but rather the other way, that if you have sales, any week in which you will have sales, H will have to be during that week. And I put the S on the bottom just because that's where it's going to be, since it's a watercolor and that's the tier that we have for watercolors. So what this means is that you could potentially have another H that is independent of S, right? But wherever you have S, S is only ever going to go with H. Next, actually, wait a minute. If that's true, if S can only go with H, that means effectively S certainly is not going to go with anybody else. Namely, it's not going to go with G at any point in time. So if S can't go with G, and we already said that G can't really go with P, that kind of means that the only person that the G can go with happens to be R. So we can actually adapt this a little bit further. We can say that if you happen to have a G in turn, that G will definitely be with R. And that's pretty powerful. That's pretty good. That means that 2 of your positions, not specific positions, but in general, 2 of your combinations are kind of figured out here. Now, again, in a similar vein, you could have an R independently of G because there could be an extra R, and that R could go with other people. In fact, the extra R can even go with H, since you could have an extra H as well. So we have a little bit of flexibility on R, but there's only going to be G can only be with R. In fact, actually, in terms of numbers, I guess that raises the question of, could we have 2 S's? Because if we have 2 S's, then you're going to have 2 H's as well, because each of those S's is going to have to be with an H. But I guess that's okay, because the other 2 sets could just be singles, right? You could have just a single GR block, and that would leave you with just a single PI block, or IP block, I guess, which could work. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that, I guess, but in the same vein, you could also have 2 Gs, and then you'll end up with 2 Rs, and then the rest of the elements will just go singles. So I guess that would be okay. We could duplicate these guys. Next, the last rule tells us that H cannot be shown earlier than the 3rd week unless I is shown in the 1st week. So that's a messy rule. So I guess let's do this purely mechanically. We can replace the word unless with an if not statement, kind of that negative sufficient condition. So I guess we can simplify this to say if not I in the first week. So if we don't have I in position 1, then what do we know? H cannot be shown earlier than 3. So if he can't be earlier, that means that H will basically be in 3 or 4. Yeah, so we can say if I is not in 1, then H will have to be either in 3 or in 4. And I guess we should kind of clarify, this means 3 or 4 only, right? Because you could arguably have him in 3 or 4 and doubling up in 1 and 2, but no, he can't go into 1 and 2 at all. He would only go into 3 or 4. And I guess in that situation, he couldn't double up because he can't go into both 3 and 4, so you would have to have only a single H. So the contrapositive then says that if we happen to have an H not just in 3 or 4, in other words, if we happen to have an H in 1 or 2, then I would have to go into 1. And I and H are both oils. So arguably speaking, we can say that there's no way to place H into 1 then, because if H goes into 1, then you would have to have I in 1 as well. But since they're both oils, that wouldn't really work. So I guess we can say that H thereby can never go into the first position. And I guess by the same token, if H can't go there, then we know that S requires the H, which means that S also cannot go into the first position. So that's pretty good. I guess the first position can really then only be, well, the other 4 elements, I guess. So it could be a GR block. I guess it could just be R. It could be P. It could be I. So yeah, we have a little bit of flexibility there. So I guess from there, let's take a look and see what we can do with the questions. This doesn't seem like we can exhaust it very well. I mean, we can say, no, even H. H could arguably go into 2, 3, or 4 in each of those. We don't know if it duplicates. No, so let's take a look at the questions. So question number 11 says, which of the following could be the schedule of the paintings shown in the 4 weeks from 1st to 4th? So I guess we go by the rules. The first rule is that you can't have consecutive paintings. So let's take a look. Answer choice A, GR, HS, IP, GR, that looks good. Answer choice B looks good as well. Answer choice C is fine. Answer choice D is also okay. Answer choice E also seems to be okay as well. Oh, actually, no, never mind. So answer choice E happens to have H's in the 2nd position and the 3rd position. So you'll notice that answer choice E doesn't actually quite work. So we can get rid of answer choice E. Next, G cannot be shown in any week with P. So G and P can never be together. Let's take a look. So answer choice A looks fine. B is good. Answer choice C is good. Answer choice D, G and P are certainly together, so that doesn't work. Next, we were told that H has to be in any week with sales, which, remember, meant that if you have sales, you'll have to have H alongside it. So answer choice A, we have an S with an H, which is fine. Answer choice B, we have an S with an I, which doesn't work, so B is out. And C, we have S with H, so we're good. And lastly, this one we'll just do the mechanical approach. If I is not in 1, well, between the remaining answer choices, answer choice C, it's worth noting, I is in 1, which means that this rule just doesn't apply. We can't do anything with it, so there's nothing wrong there. But answer choice A does not have an I in the 1st position, but you'll notice that H is in the 2nd position, which is not supposed to happen. So we can get rid of answer choice A, and that leaves us with answer choice C to be the only viable one here. I guess for history, we can plug that one in. So essentially we have an I with P, we have GR, HS, and then we have GR again. And I guess that kind of reinforces the idea that, yeah, we could have double G's. It just means that you would have to have double R's. So from there, let's take a look at the local questions. So the first local question that we have here is question number 12, which says, if S is shown in the 2nd week, then, well, let's take a look and see what we can do with that. So if we happen to have S, which is a watercolor, in the 2nd week. So first of all, we already know that S is definitely going to have to go with the H. So we can know that H is going to go alongside it over there. Now, can we do anything with that further? Well, actually, first of all, so if H is in 1 or 2, which as it turns out to be it is, then I would have to go into 1. So that would lock I into the first position. Now, G obviously can't go, in the first position just because that's already taken, it's already an I over here, so we can't do much with G. G can still go into 3 or 4. The third position, it can't be an H, but it could still be a double I, right? The second I could go there, or it could be a GR block. So it looks like we have a little bit of flexibility here. The question itself, let's take a look. Maybe we can do this as is. So the question is, each of the following could be in the third week except, so who cannot go in the third week? A, G, and G seems very plausible, right? You put a GR block there, so why not? B, H, and no, H definitely can't go there, because if H goes here, then it's going to be next to another H, and that certainly doesn't work. So there it is. The best answer to question number 12 is B. Next, number 13 is global. We'll come back to that one in a moment. Let's take a look at question 14. So we have, if G is shown in the first week, so if G happens to be in week 1, and we know that G is an oil, well, first of all, we know that G always carries R with him, right? Which means that R is definitely going to be down here. Moreover, we do know that if I is not in 1, then H has to go into 3 or 4. Now, I certainly isn't in 1, so H is basically going to have to go somewhere over there. It definitely could not go into 1 or 2. But if it can't go into 1 or 2, and obviously it can't go into 1 because 1's busy, but the second position, arguably speaking, the second position doesn't have a lot of options because it can't be a G or an R. So if it can't be a G on the oil side and it can't be an I, sorry, it can't be an H rather, then this would have to then be an I. And on the bottom, we can't really have S here either because S would have required H, and it can't be an R, so this would actually have to be a P over here. Now, we'll still have to have an H somewhere in 3 or 4, but that seems flexible, and I guess you'll have to have an HS block specifically. And your duplicate will have to be one of these set because, we can't have 2 H's or 2 S's next to each other. So I guess let's see what we can do with this. The question asks, which of the following now could be true? I goes into the third week, and no, because that would be an I next to an I, so answer choice A is out. Next, can we have P shown in the third week? Same problem, we can't have a P next to a P. Next, can we have R in the second week? No, because that's already taken care of. Next, can we have R in the fourth week? And that maybe could happen, right? You could arguably place an R over here, so let's keep that one for a moment, just in case. S in the second week? No, second week is already taken care of, so the best answer here is answer choice D for question number 14. Next, 15 is global. We'll come back to that one in a second. Let's take a look at 16. So if R is shown in both the second and the fourth weeks, so I guess let's see what we can do with that. So if R is in 2 and in 4 as well, I guess the question becomes, what does that mean for us? So R is obviously going to be your duplicate, but just because R is your duplicate doesn't mean that G has to be, right? G could still be independent in a sense. Now we're definitely going to have I and S obviously S and P in 1 and 3, right? So the R is taken care of. So between 1 and 3, we still have to fit an S and we still have to fit a P, except S can't go into the first position, right? Because that was our primary deduction, which means we know that S is definitely going to go into position 3. So that's pretty good. And that means that if S is there, then H is going to have to join them. It also means that P is going to have to go into position 1 now because, well, that's the only place P can go as a watercolor. Now from here, I guess, do we know much more? Obviously, we're not going to have any more. I guess we can't have any more H's because H is taken care of, right? There's no H in 1, and we can't put an H next to an H. But I and G, oh, well, wait a minute. The first position, so the first position certainly can't be a G because G requires an R, and we said it can't be an H because that's, again, our baseline deduction, which means that the first position also then narrows down to just being an I. Okay, so this is pretty good. If the first position is an I now, then the second position can only be a G because you can't have I next to I and you can't have H next to H. Now the fourth position could be a double I or it could be a double G, so there we have a little bit of flexibility. So I guess with that, let's take a look at what we have. So the question itself asks, which of the following could happen? Can we have G in 1? And no, that definitely cannot be true at the moment, so answer choice A is out. Can we have H in 2? No, that definitely can't happen either because 2 is already figured out. Can we have H in 4? And no, because that would mean that we have an H next to an H, so that's certainly out. Can we have I in 2? And no, because I is already in 1, and 2 is already figured out as well. Answer choice E, I in 4. And yes, this arguably could have been either I or G, so we had that flexibility. So answer choice E becomes the best answer to question number 16. I guess we can also just clarify this, that this is an I or a G, one way or the other, just for history. Anyways, number 17 is our modifier, so we'll come back to that one in a moment. Let's take a look back to the globals. So question number 13, which of the following must be false? So what cannot possibly happen? Answer choice A, S is shown in the first week. Actually, there it is. Yeah, we definitely know that neither H nor S can be shown in the first week. That was our baseline deduction. So best answer to number 13 is answer choice A. Next, number 15. The schedule of the paintings shown in the 4 weeks is completely determined if which of the following. So basically, what would lock down the game completely? Let's take a look. Answer choice A. G is shown twice. Now, if G is shown twice, to be fair, every single scenario where we've seen G go twice so far would have locked the game. So this scenario has G twice and that's resolved. And this scenario, if G went twice, then that will be the last missing piece. But of course, that doesn't mean that that in itself would have locked the game. It just means that historically, it happens to be the case that those were resolved scenarios. That said, though, G does have consequences to him, doesn't he? Because if we have G going twice, then he's in both cases going to be with R. So that might do some damage. Let's just kind of brainstorm this. If we have 2 Gs, which means that you're going to have 2 Rs, we're further going to have an HS block, right? Because S has to go with H. And then the last will have to be an IP block because, well, those are the only guys that remain. So we have that much, but would this allow us to figure out the positioning? Now, the GRs might be kind of restrictive right now, and I guess the HS block could not go first. But still, that seems quite open, doesn't it? Because even if HS doesn't go first, then it seems like the GR blocks could still have flexibility. They could still go into 1 and 3, for example. You could have them in 1 and 4, perhaps, 2 and 4 even. This doesn't seem like it would go further than this. We'd be able to figure out the associations, but it doesn't seem like we'd be able to figure out the positioning. Answer choice B, H is shown twice. So if we have to have 2 H's, what would that mean for us? Well, first of all, one of those H's would have to be with an S. But the other one doesn't, right? Because we said H could be independent of S. So that's a bit annoying because that's a bit more open. That said, though, we definitely know that the 2 H's would go into positions 2 and 4 because we know that we can't have H in position 1. Now, if we run the 2 H's into positions 2 and 4, let's kind of briefly run that in our baseline here. So if we ran the H's in 2 and 4, that means that I would have to go into 1 because if H is in 2, then I is in 1. And from there, I guess that would force the remaining oil into here, G, and G is going to have to go with R. So this is pretty good. That said, though, do we still know? I guess this should have stuck out earlier, which is that we still don't really know which of these 2 H's is going to be with the S. In fact, it's almost logically identical between these 2 positions. There's no reason why I would have to go with one over the other. So this seems like this is as far as it goes. We wouldn't be able to completely lock quite everything down. So this doesn't seem like it would work as an answer. Next, answer choice C. P is shown twice. So I guess the question here is, if we have 2 P's, would that lock down the game? Well, if we happen to have 2 P's, I guess what would that mean for us, if anything? Otherwise we're going to still have to have, now P's are watercolors, so let's just put them on the bottom. We'll have to have an SH block, obviously, and you'll have to have a GR block, and that'll be kind of separate from these guys. Now, one of those P's is definitely then going to have to be with an I, but the other of those P's, actually, even right there, the other of those p's, I mean, it can't be with g, but couldn't you have another I, or even perhaps have it with an h? Because h and p are still kind of friendly with each other. So this doesn't seem like you'd be able to completely lock it down. Moreover, the positioning seems wide open as well, so I'm not sure this would go very far. Next, R is shown twice. Actually, wait a minute. Before we do answer choice D, let's take a look at E, because if you have sales, sales is a very restrictive element here, so it might be worth kind of looking at that one first. In fact, it might have been a good idea to kind of do that from the get-go. Just because if you have two S's, similar to the fact that if you have two G's, it would be very heavily restrictive, having two S's would also be very restrictive because it would lock down H's in both of them. In fact, it would be a very similar situation to this, except we would know that both of them are going to have an SH. So if we have two S's, we're going to have two H's. We still need to have a GR block, and the remaining people are going to be just I and P going together. But here it is. S and H can never be first, which means if you have to have two of those, then they can only go into positions 2 and 4. And once that's taken care of, essentially if we place the H's into positions 2 and 4, in fact, you know what, let's just kind of line that up. We've kind of run out of room here, so we'll just improvise. If you happen to have two H's and two S's, then effectively you'll have to have the H's and the S's in 2 and 4. And now if H is in 2, then I has to go into 1, so your IP block gets stuck over here, and the GR block lands over there, and that takes care of it. So the best answer to question number 15 then is answer choice E. If we have two S's, it's definitely going to lock the game down. Next, question number 17. Which of the following, if substituted for the condition that G cannot be together with P, would have the exact same impact on the game? So we're trying to replace this rule right here, that G and P cannot be together. And it's worth noting the logical consequence of that was also this, that effectively it meant that G and R will, anytime you have G, you would have had to have R, because if G can't be with P, and we know that G could never be with S, then it would have had to be with R. So answer choice A. R must be shown in any week in which you have G. Now, that's kind of, I guess that's it right there, right? Any week in which you have G, we would have had to have R. Now that had to be true, so that meets that parameter. And if that were true, if you said that anytime you have a G, then you'll have to have an R, then that guarantees that G and P will never be together. So answer choice A is effectively the perfect answer here. Let's take a look at the other answer choices, just to kind of make sure that we're on the same page. So remember that when you're looking to substitute a rule, you're looking for two parameters. You're looking for something that would have that would guarantee the result, which is to say that would guarantee that the initial rule would be maintained. In this case, to say that G and P, we're trying to make sure that they'll never be together. And the second half of it is you're looking for something that always had to be true. Now, answer choice A meets both parameters. It must be true that anytime you had G, you would have had to have R. And if that was true, it would have guaranteed that G and P will never be together. Let's look at the other answer choices. B, G must be shown in any week in which you have R. Now, it's worth noting that didn't actually have to be true. You never had to have a G anytime you had an R, because as we said, R could have always been independent. So because answer choice B never had to be true, that gets disqualified. Next, if P is not shown in week 1, then sales must be shown no earlier than the 3rd week. Now, this one's a bit of a pain to kind of parse. So I guess this is saying that if we don't have P in 1, then S would have to go into 3 or 4. Now, does that even really have to be true? Because we know that H and S could never go in 1. So if P is not in 1, that would have meant that R would have had to be in 1. And I mean, does that really mean anything? If R happens to be in 1, I mean, we know that if I was not in 1, then S would be stuck in 3 or 4. That's true. But if R is in 1, you could have had him with I, so I don't see a reason that this ever had to be true in the first place. Now, to be honest, if you're crunched for time, this isn't really a path you want to kind of be going down, just because answer choice A is a sure thing, and answer choice C doesn't seem like it has much going for it. We didn't even look at whether this would actually have much of an impact, which it still doesn't really seem to do that. So at this point, I mean, looking at answer choice C, if there doesn't seem to be anything of merit to it, you might want to leave it open, but, come back to it later if anything, especially since we have answer choice A, which is a perfect response here. But if you kind of want that proper reason for why answer choice C is wrong, at the very least, it never had to be true, so that already would have disqualified it. Because if P was not first, that doesn't mean that S was stuck in 3 or 4. In fact, we have even a scenario here in which P was not or didn't have to be first, but you could have had the S and the H over here together, in which case S would have been second. Now, actually, since we're already here, let's kind of take the other side of it. If this rule were true, would this even have the impact that we need? If by telling us that if P is not first, then sales would have to be in 3 or 4, does that really guarantee that G and P will never be together? And no, first of all, this only tells you what happens if P is not first, because if P is first, then it allows for anything to happen, in which case G could have been with P. So it's worth noting this doesn't really have much of an impact either. This does almost nothing to stop G and P from being together. Even if it had to be true, it still wouldn't be a good answer choice. So either way, answer choice C is out. D. If P is shown in the first week, then I must also be in the first week. Now, I guess, first of all, is that true? If P was first, did it have to go with I? Now, technically, it does actually look like that's true, because originally, if P was first, then it could not have gone with G, and H was never first either, so it could not have gone with H, so it would have had to be with I. So answer choice D always had to be true. But then there's the other half. Would this actually have much of an impact? And no, this would only have an impact if P happens to be first, but P could also go into other positions as well. And in those other positions, it would not have stopped P from going with G. This would have only stopped P from being with G in the first position, but not anywhere else. So this doesn't seem like it would have much of an impact, so answer choice D is out. Next, E. H cannot be shown together with R. Now, is that true? Is it true that H could never go with R? To be fair, G definitely had to go with R. That's a given. But I'm not sure that that stops, because you could have an extra R, couldn't you? Hypothetically, if we had an H with an R, originally we would have had to have a G with an R as well, and you would have had to have an H with an S because we have that rule, and that leaves you with, I guess, I and P, which actually is plausible because then everybody's taken care of, so this never had to be true. Answer choice E never had to be true, so that makes it a bad answer choice either way. So the best answer to question number 17 is A. And for the record, answer choice A, as soon as you saw that that would have worked, that it would have guaranteed that we have what we're looking for, you really shouldn't have been kind of grinding those other answer choices. But, I guess for academic purposes, there it is. Best answer here is A.